Hello again. This video is going to talk about some of the things we need to think about when we're starting to do our research. So some basic concepts in research. The first thing we're going to talk about is going to be types of research we can do, and the second thing we're going to talk about is source bias. Well, the first thing we want to think about when we're doing research is the multiple kinds of things we can research from. A whole list of things here has been talked about in the textbook, so I'm not going to go over it in a ton of detail. However, I do want to talk about some of these options and what you might find in these options. Now, when you go out and you're actually trying to find information about your topic, it might be very tempting to go directly to Google and just type in American Red Cross or something like that. I would really urge you not to do that. You're going to find some information, but it's not going to be nearly as strong as the information you can find if you use the resources available through the library. For instance, the library is going to have access to magazines, journal articles, and government documents that you wouldn't necessarily be able to find if you did a Google search. Magazine articles are nice because they go into a little bit more depth about something. For instance, if you're doing something and you say that your problem is that we aren't donating enough blood, you might be able to find a magazine article that would be able to tell you more about why we don't donate blood as much as we should be. Additionally, journal articles are going to be very, very high quality work. It's going to be very in-depth types of research that are going to be able to help you out. And some journal articles may be more helpful than others. Obviously, they're going to be a little bit more high-level language because they're intended for an audience that's not necessarily the general population. However, if you use journal articles, you're getting high-quality research because most journal articles have been peer evaluated, which means basically that other people that are in that field read the article and said, yep, this person knows what they're talking about. Government documents are something that I don't think we use enough of in terms of speech research and that type of thing. Government documents can be anything from statistics from the CDC or articles that are put out by any other number of different governmental agencies. Those are good places where you can find overarching statistics or overarching trends that might help you to establish the problem or the harms that you're trying to talk about in your speech. So those are good things to think about too. Books may not be the best option for you, or reference materials may not be the best option for you either. Books generally tend to be a little bit older and the information in them isn't going to be as up-to-date as in magazines and journal articles. Additionally, reference materials don't really count as citations. This is a way to get some basic information about your topic, like if you need to get a definition of what cancer is. That can be a good thing for your information. However, in most cases, you wouldn't want to cite a dictionary or encyclopedia or almanac in your actual speech. You could cite a book, and if you need some very in-depth information, a book might be a good place to look for it. Television and radio programs are going to be useful for you depending on if you can find something that's going to be useful about your topic. The last type of research that I think would be really useful for you to think about using would be using newspaper articles. If you get into the LexisNexis or you get into ProQuest News Source, those are two very good ways that you can do searches for newspaper articles or that type of thing. Very specific things about your specific topic. And you'll be able to search for papers all over the world, which can be very useful in terms of that. And newspapers are useful compared to magazines because newspapers tend to be a shorter version of the same type of information in magazines. They're made for us, people who don't have a very long attention span. So you can get a good newspaper article that can be a really effective way to boost some of your credibility. There is something I want to talk about, and that's the idea of source bias. Source bias is something we need to consider when we're reading through our different resources. Bias basically means that your source is promoting one side over the other. So if you're reading something from Fox News, you need to recognize that Fox News has come out as having a bias towards the Republican or conservative side of the aisle. As opposed to something, if you're reading something on MSNBC, that has come out as a news source that tends to promote more liberal or democratic types of things. Okay? So know about the biases that your source might have. Also, recognize that all sources have bias. There is no source out there that is free of any bias. Even statistics have some type of bias in them. They're leaning more one way than another. Now, you could have an argument about this with me, and that's fine. We can argue about it, but for the course of this class, let's just assume that all sources have bias. So, when we're thinking about bias in our sources, what we need to consider is this bias influencing the quality of the information? All right? Is this something that's going to be, is the bias going to influence what information the source is going to be giving me, as opposed to a more objective type of view of whatever situation or problem we're looking at? Additionally, we need to consider, are the sources we're using in our speech actually going to be only towards one direction? So are we using all conservative sources, or are we using all liberal sources? If we're doing that, we're not really going to be able to be objective. So we need to mix and match those types of sources we're using to become objective and be more credible for our audience members. And finally, we need to think about, are we only looking at sources that agree with what we're trying to say? If we're doing that, we're not really doing our job as researchers. We need to be able to get a comprehensive picture to understand what our side says and what the other side says, so that we can make a better argument overall.